Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring the Paranormal. Sorry we're a few hours late. Some time schedule and conflicts with my scheduling kind of messed things up, but we are here this afternoon. So I know a lot of people had told me that they'll be watching the replay. If you're watching the replay, let us know you're here. And if you are watching us live, feel free to ask any questions you have whatsoever. And starting next week, we will be back at our typical 11 a.m. time slot, Eastern time. But before we go any further, I want to welcome my guest, Bruce. I'm super excited to have him join us today. Welcome to the show and happy Halloween.
Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. How about you?
I was going to say, it's Halloween. It's happy Halloween.
Exactly. And I was running errands this morning and doing a few things for work, and I was like, oh my goodness, it's Halloween.
Well, and we've, as with the way technology is these days, we've had our thing. It's like we had a thing set up and we're like, oh, we need to change that time. And then I'm like, oh no, I have an issue with someone that I'm helping with the undisclosed issue. And then finally we got back together today, and then I couldn't get anything to work. It was, it's a technology thing. Yeah, I'm always wondering if when stuff screws up on podcasts or on vodcasts for paranormal, if it's actually, I'd like to claim it's spirits screwing with things. You always see things as spirits turning on and off flashlights. I'm like, it's messing with, it's not me being an idiot with my phone. It's some spirit messing with me.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because there have been times where I've had Bishop Long, I've had him on. And the minute he starts talking about one of his cases, no matter what time or what day it is, it shuts down when he tries to talk about that case. Or if I try to talk about a haunted location, all of a sudden I lose my audio.
I had the same thing happen last year. I was on a podcast called Ghost Magnet with Bridget Marquardt, and of course, I'm sure she had a green screen background, unless she just lives in a freaking fabulous place, which is possible because she was a girlfriend of Hugh Hefner. But I mean, I'm looking at this thing and it seems like there's just a ton of tech and suddenly nothing worked. And I'm like, oh, what happened? Yeah. And I live in a town that is clearly from the 1880s. It's clearly 1880s town. And my house is relatively new. It was built in the 90s, but I'm looking at a house actually that they streamed from Global Ghost Hunt the other night. It's called the Silver Spur Homestead, and it's actually the old home of, he was a clown. And, no one out there in the audience is going to know who this guy is unless they're like my age, right? It's like this guy was like a Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circus clown. His name was Emmett Kelly Jr. And he wrote a story about his house back in the 60s, where it's like my haunted house on Skyline. And, in the 60s, nobody talked about it wasn't like now where everyone's like, oh, paranormal. Back then you said, there's ghosts at my house. And they said, we're going to have a doctor come and see you because he's going to take you to the loony bin right now.
Right.
But I could see that from my house as well.
Yeah. And now the ghosts are probably like, oh no, another ghost team.
I'll tell you, one of my favorite things now is to get what I call para memes, which are like memes, but they're all paranormal, Right. One of my favorite ones is there's this haunted doll like walking down the hallway, and this cat is up on a railing, reaching down and grabbing it by the hair. And it's like, humans are scared of you, but I'm not,
Right, exactly. Now, before we went live, you showed me the fantastic view that's behind the camera. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. That's Tombstone, right?
Watch, I will show you. So that's Tombstone right there. Like almost directly where I'm pointing the camera is where the Birdcage Theater is. And then Shefflin Hall is over to the side. And I don't think you can see the courthouse from here, but I'm literally like God, I'm like a 2.5 minute drive from the Birdcage Theater. I can look down and see it. And the entire hillside that I'm on here is called the Mining District. Now, actually, the whole area was kind of the mining district. The whole town's got mine tunnels underneath it. Actually, I think it was 1906, behind where the Birdcage is, and over near the Goodenough Mine, an ice wagon fell through the street because there was not that much space between the shafts and where the ice wagon was. And it fell 75 feet. The horse and the wagon went, and then they went down and they found, and somehow the horse was okay. And they let him out through one of the mine shafts. So crazy.
Yeah, the spirits caught the horse.
Well, Tombstone's a weird place. Do you live in a small area? Do you live in a larger area of Florida?
We're just outside of Tampa.
Oh, well, so a large. Yeah. So Tombstone, I used to live in the Los Angeles area, and LA, the count, or the little valley I lived in had 3 million people in it. The entire county here, which is 2,000 square miles bigger than Los Angeles County, only has 130,000 people. Tombstone area's got about 1,200 to 1,300 people. So it's very, very small town. But on the bright side, when you move in, like, your neighbor brings you a fresh baked pie, which is cool. So welcome to the neighborhood. It's very cool.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town. I miss that.
And I was born in Arizona, and the town I was I don't want to call it my golden years, but I'm getting in them. I'm a little bit older, and I was born in a town that had 20,000 people, and now it's crazy. It's like 600,000 or 700,000 people. It's insane.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I like small towns like where you're at right now. So with Tombstone being one of the most haunted locations that you hear about, have any of the spirits made their way to your home, or do they kind of stick in town?
I do have a story about that, although I honestly don't think my home is haunted. I don't think it's haunted at all. But there was a time, and I was actually in the hospital, and my wife, we had this big, like, decorative plate, like those kind of decorative plates you get from like some church or something, where it's like the 150th anniversary or something. And it's heavy. It's not like a light plate. It's like one of those big ceramic heavy plates. And it was in a plate holder up on a shelf on the wall behind where my computer is. And there's no wind over there. There's no nothing over there. And there was a bunch of tchotchkes, like, all in front of this plate. And my wife hears this smash on the floor, and she goes over, and this plate is on the floor. But it's not just on the floor. It's on the floor like 9 feet from where the wall is. And none of the tchotchkes that were in front of the plate are knocked over. The plate holder's not knocked over, but the plate, like, somehow lifted up and went across all this stuff. So I do know a gal who is a younger gal who is strangely perceptive. I'll just leave it that way. She doesn't even like it, but she's strangely perceptive. And I had her check out the plate and everything, and she's like, I'm not feeling any vibes off it at all. And my wife's like, because we used to live in California, my wife's like, oh, it was an earthquake. I'm like, come on. I'm like, I've lived through a ton of earthquakes. I've never seen anything like that before. So that's the only thing. I mean, I do get, it's kind of weird up here because I do get like readings that go up here, but there's a lot of different metals and stuff in the ground out here. And I just don't know if any of that stuff's a reality or not. I'm a believer with kind of a skeptical edge, right? Because I really want to be able to disprove stuff, because if I can't disprove it, then I'm like, yes, that's real, Right. And so I'm kind of a debunker and a real McCoy guy at the same time. So.
Mhm. Well, and you got to also eliminate the natural occurrences anyway to get to
Right.
the actual facts. And, whether you're trying to get scientific data or just trying to prove that something's happening, you can't be, oh, something fell off the wall and not look into it.
Well, and it's so weird here because, like I said, I live above the mining district. There are mine entrances in many spots back where I live on the hill. Like, you want to be careful because you don't want to go investigating in mines too much because your cell phone doesn't work in there at all. But there was a lot of guys that died mining too. There's always talk, the Good Enough mine and the Tough Nut mine, which are ones that are Good Enough's open to the public all the time. You can go in there and take tours. And the Tough Nut, they do a dinner theater in, and it's kind of funky. It's not that easy to get in there. It's back in there a ways, but apparently there's a lot of activity in the Tough Nut as well. And it's just, mining was a hard thing. A lot of guys. I do a thing for Tombstone called Discover Tombstone, and that's on Facebook. And I also do Discover Boot Hill. And the amount of people that died in Tombstone, I guess if you look at where you live, a lot of people die there too. It's just here, it's like a lot of weird deaths, strange deaths, blown up by an early mine charge going off, had their head run over by a wagon. It's like creepy stuff like that. We've got a thing in Boot Hill where these kids called the Brady brothers are buried, and one died trying to save the other from drowning in the San Pedro River. And I have to tell this for people that live in other parts of the country. The San Pedro River it runs north, which, almost no rivers run north, but it runs north. And most of the time it's like this deep. And unless there's monsoon rains, and then it'll be 15 feet deep, running 60 miles an hour bank to bank. And these kids somehow got in the water when it was running fast, and one tried to save the other. And there's a lot of these, people that get shot and things like that where deaths are sudden. And I always wonder if it's people that leave energy behind or spirits behind, is it because everything was so fast? It's like they don't even know they're gone. You know what I mean? It's like they were shot on the street and boom, they're gone. They die unexpected. The guy falls off his wagon and the wheel crushes his head. It's like, what the? Or we had a number of people that were local that were killed by natives because, of course, we were taking over their land, so they didn't like that. And there's just a lot of fast, blown up by a mine blast. 1 second you're there, the next second you're gone. I always wonder if that has a hand in making people stay around.
Right. Yeah, I truly agree with you on that one. I think it does. And going back to the mines real quick, I know in Nevada, when we lived out there, we were actually investigating a mine for the documentary that we filmed. And our tour guide who took us down there told us, okay, don't go past this point, because this is the dangerous part of mines. Is he goes, if you go past here, you run the risk of falling into an endless pit.
Oh, it won't be endless. You'll hit bottom, but you're not going to want to. That's for sure.
Right. But so it's like, okay, so don't go past there.
We have a thing, and actually it's not far from my house. It's right over there. And I can almost see it from where I'm sitting. And there is a huge hole in the top of the ground, which I believe at one time was like a hoisting shaft and a ventilation shaft. And I found it because I'm hiking around with my husky, and suddenly I see these, they're actually probably on the table behind me somewhere up here, but there's mine core samples. And I found a bunch of them on the ground, and I'm like, that's weird. They're just laying here on the ground. I'm like, I wonder what they're from. And suddenly, like behind this bush, there is a hole that's about the size of a Volkswagen. I mean, it would have been very easy to fall into.
Right.
And I'm like, I wonder how deep that is. And I take a pretty good sized rock that if you dropped it next to you would make a loud thud, right? Mm-hmm. Drop it over the side. And the first thing that happens is about 100 pigeons come flying out of there. But I drop it over the side and I'm like, I don't hear it hitting the bottom. And it's like, and then suddenly I hear this like that loud, just like, and I'm like, oh, and I was talking to the city historian. And he goes, oh yeah, that probably went 800 feet. And I'm like, oh really? And he goes, yeah, 800 feet straight down. He goes, if you fell, you wouldn't have to worry about it. He goes, you could haunt that area. Because I'm going to do that. If I ever die, if I ever die, I'm going to die. I'm going to haunt, but I'm going to do weird stuff. Like you always hear about things like Amityville Horror where someone's going to write something on the wall, like get out. I'm going to write like positive reinforcement stuff. I'm going to be like in blood though. It's going to be like, have a great day.
You got this.
Yeah, you got this. It's all good today.
Yeah. And that's funny that you say that because I actually posted on my page a couple days ago that said, if you were to come back and haunt people, what would you do? And some of the answers were similar to that. You know, one person just said that they would mess with the remote control or they would change the alarm on their phone.
I like change the channel right at the with the 2-minute warning on football or something. They're like, what? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny because none of them said anything malevolent. So it was like kind of interesting to see how people think of what they're going to do when they go.
Come on, all these guys are lying. They're going to go haunt like some women's dressing room or something at a you know, the LA Lakers something. I don't know.
Right.
I would have done that when I was young. No, actually not so much anymore, but I would have at one time.
I'll use it to find my peace and go sit at a mountaintop. Where no one else goes.
Well, in here, it's like Tombstone would be kind of crowded, I think, to haunt people because I was doing a PowerPoint for someone the other day that they're going to go to a thing up in Apache Junction, which is up kind of near Phoenix. And they're going to do a presentation on Discover Tombstone, talk about some of the cool stuff that Tombstone has, and then talk about the hauntings. And, you know, I started going through and I'm like, here's the location, and I got to about 4 or 5 slides with like 4 locations on each slide to talk about. And I'm like, I'm not even done with places, but I can't have this presentation go too long. I'm like, things only got to be 45 minutes long. I'm like, I need to take stuff out because I mean, just no matter what. I mean, we've got, everyone knows, well, most people know about the Birdcage Theater. It's always listed in top 10s. And I was telling you before the show, I think it's because they do public ghost tours there all the time. So there's kind of more people to vote for them. But then there's, you know, like I said, the Good Enough Mine and the Tough Nut Mine. There is Hotel Tombstone and the Arcade, which is a big building. It used to be called T. Miller's. Some people might know it from that. Across the street from that, there's Undertaker Espresso, which didn't actually used to be an Undertaker's, but they've got a bunch of 1880s Undertaker gear in their side room, and that room is pretty active. And then there's like Big Nose Kate's has this story about this this guy called the Swamper that was like a janitor guy, used to live in the basement. He dug a hole through the bottom of his room into the mine shafts, and the whole story is supposedly he was digging silver there every day and then stashing it somewhere in the hotel, and he still haunts the place to guard his silver. And there's Red Buffalo where Morgan Earp got shot, and a lot of people see Virgil Earp, who was wounded. I don't know if have you ever seen the movie Tombstone?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you if Virgil, because Virgil's also known to haunt Goldfield.
Well, I got to tell you, I have a buddy that is an Arizona Ranger, and he used to be like a lot of stuff. He was in the military. He was a federal agent, and I asked him one time, I said, do you believe in ghosts? And he goes, I don't really believe in ghosts. And I'm like, but have you ever seen anything in Tombstone that you can't explain? He goes, all the time. And I'm like, and this is a guy who's trained to be observant and trained to see you. So he's walking down the street one night. It's really pleasant in the right times of year when it's not cold. It's really pleasant to walk down the middle of Allen Street at night, right? It's just very cool vibe, because most cities or towns, you can't walk around at night without just seeing zillions of cars and stuff. And here you can't. And he says, I'm walking down the street. It's about 2:30 in the morning. And he goes, it's so peaceful. He's checking out, the Starfield at night and everything. And he goes, I see a guy by Wyatt Earp's Oriental Saloon. And he goes, he's dressed in like 1880s period attire. He goes, and that's not unusual here. A lot of people dress up like they're wearing period attire. And he goes, so that wasn't unusual. He goes, but the time frame was weird because there's no bars open at that time. And he goes, so I just want to, check him out and see what it is. And he's walking across towards the Crystal Palace at like an angle. And he goes, now I'm going to get to the corner like 3 seconds after this guy. He goes, I speeded up my step, but we're kind of coming together, but he's going to get there before me. But as soon as I turn the corner, I'm going to see him right then. And he goes, and I turn the corner, he goes, there's nobody there. And I'm like, could he have hidden behind something? He goes, there's nowhere to hide. The Crystal Palace is a solid wall for about 150 feet. And he goes, no cars on the street, and there's nowhere else to duck in. And I'm like, so what's the explanation? And I go, and the guy goes, well, I'm thinking, super, super, super fast. I'm like, come on, that no one's that fast. And he's like, he goes, I'm telling you, there's no way I wouldn't have seen him. He goes, and yet I didn't see him. So that happened. That corner right there, they call the bloodiest corner in Arizona. A number of people took bullets there. And Virgil Earp took 3 shotgun blasts, and it didn't kill him. So talk about kind of a studly old Western guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So what, in your opinion, would be the most haunted location in Tombstone?
Shufflin Hall. Now, this is a place that most people don't even know exists. I think it's the largest adobe structure in the United States. And it was a theater, and it was built by Ed Shufflin. Ed Shufflin is the guy that discovered silver in Tombstone. So he founded the town, and a lot of stuff that we now have. Shufflin Park, we got a big statue of him in the park, and there's Shufflin Hall was named for him by his brother. He was only here for a short period of time. Actually, he found silver, was here for a couple of years, and then it turns out he likes to prospect, but he didn't really like to mine, right? So it's like he'd find it, and then he'd be like, all right, see ya, I'm out of here. I'm going somewhere else. And but Shufflin Hall is there is always stuff at Shufflin Hall. I've been in there. I used to work with the repertory organization that used to do plays in there, and there's always stuff in Shufflin Hall. There's always stuff in Shufflin Hall. And I was telling you earlier how I like to be a believer and a debunker at the same time, because I want to know if what I'm hearing or seeing is actually something, or if it's something, right, something not. And so when we did the Paracon last year, the first annual Paracon, I had met some paranormal teams, and we're going to, as kind of a thank you, we're going to take them to investigate Boot Hill Graveyard and Shufflin Hall. Now, some people get into Boot Hill Graveyard, but nobody gets into Shufflin Hall. It's like, that's owned by the city, and the city here is kind of meat and potatoes. They're like, they're not 100% convinced of, well, I shouldn't say they're not, because everyone that lives here is convinced it's haunted as hell.
Mhm.
But the city entity itself is like, yeah, you know, they're kind of meat and potatoes. I don't know about that. And they don't usually open Shefflin Hall. They open Shefflin Hall for like historical speeches and things like that. And so we take these teams over, and one of these teams I hadn't met, and the other team I had met. And the ones I had met them at Undertaker Coffee. That's where they were going to be investigating with the public, taking them around, getting them used to the area so they could see, having the people that work there tell them where they usually get activity, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And there was this other team called Get Out Paranormal Arizona, Get Out Paranormal AZ. And they go down in the basement. And this is one of those things where something happened where I'm like, oh, I can't debunk that at all. So they go down in the basement, and I had never met them yet. I had only met these other two guys. Listen to the name of their group, His and Hers. His and Hers. I think it's a great name. But anyway, these guys go down in the basement, and you know, they're down there for a while and with these other guys upstairs, and they come up out of the basement, and the girl goes, oh my God. And I'm like, what? And she's like, we were talking with this girl. And I go, oh yeah, we all call her Emmy. And she goes, no, but we're not like just talking with her, like through spirit box and stuff. They're like, she's answering questions pretty directly in long sentences. I'm like, oh yeah, she's known for that. And they're like, oh my God. They're like, but we couldn't talk to the other ghost. And I'm like, and you know, there's a couple of other ghosts in there, but I didn't know what she was talking about. And I go, who were you trying to talk to? And she goes, Emmy kept telling us to say hi to Bruce. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, she goes, is there a ghost named Bruce? I go, my name's Bruce. And she goes, and then without even thinking about it, she's like, oh, Emmy said to say hi to you. And I'm like, oh, that's freaking creepy. Yeah. And, you know, there's weird stuff that happens. I mean, we've been down in the dressing room before. I heard Boots walk across the stage where the entire building's closed off. And my wife, who's a 100% skeptic, who actually bought a shirt for Paracon that said token skeptic on it so she could wear it around. She's like, oh, that's a mouse. And I'm like, that's on stage, and that is a pair of boots. That's not a mouse in cowboy boots right there. And there's just lots of activity in there. This guy named Jeff Woolwine, he does a lot of UFO stuff too, but he's got a group called Haunted Encounter Adventures, I believe, and he was on stage because Shefflin Hall has a big stage on it. And in like the 20s, they use it as a movie theater. But he was talking with Emmy for a long time. And there was like probably 15 people that were like sitting and cheering. It was so amazing just to watch it. And this girl she sounds kind of precocious. Like she's like 8 or 9 years old. She's not a little kid, but she's not an older kid either, but she knows what she's talking about. And she's just on and on and on. And I'm like, God, they're like 2 sentences long. And you know, on spirit boxes, it's going through all these different channels. Right. And so when you hear something that's like a sentence and a half or 2 sentences long, it sounds bizarre on a spirit box because it's almost like you're listening to speakerphone on a phone.
Yeah. And also probably where you guys are at, you don't get many radio stations. So the chances of you getting something. We actually, so everybody around here is like using like Sirius or something like that because we get, and this kills me. We get one channel that's called the Oldies channel, and it plays stuff like Guns N' Roses on it. And I'm like, that's the Oldies? I go, what happened? I remember when the Oldies channel was like the Big Bopper and Chubby Checker and guys from the 50s. And now the Oldies station is playing 90s, you know, and I'm like, oh my God.
But you're right. It's kind of like people that use like EMF detectors and things like that. When you do that at Boot Hill, there is like zero electricity out in that whole area where the graveyard is. I mean, when you get activity there, there's just nothing to make activity happen. You know, it's just crazy when it does.
Yeah, I know we used the Spirit Box in Gold Point, and there were no radio stations in Gold Point whatsoever. And it was funny because I always introduce myself before I start talking to the spirits, and it was like an AA meeting. It's like, you know, hi, I'm Heather, and then all of a sudden you're hi, Heather, hi. It's like all these different voices. Hi, Heather.
Actually, the funny thing is, I was telling you the other day, the reason why I was missing the last show is I myself happen to be in AA for a lot longer than I've been sober, but I'm going to have 34 years sober coming up on the 6th of November.
Congratulations.
So that'll tell you something. Have you ever heard of I'm sure you have, but have you ever heard of a band called Motley Crue?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I used to party with them all the time when I lived in the LA area.
Yeah.
But
I actually saw them in concert when I was in high school.
There you go. Oh, well, you know what, though? Look at you. You're aging like fine wine, and I'm aging like milk.
Thank you. I was going to say I'm a lot older than people think.
Well, if you saw Motley Crue in high school, I have an idea.
I don't.
That's about, well, you know, they were touring then. So, I mean, I remember them in I remember Tommy Lee in elementary school, but
yeah,
and his sister.
That would have been a fun group to hang out with.
You know, it was a dangerous group to hang out with. I'm shocked that they're still alive, as I am with many of those bands back then. Yeah. They could all be haunting by now. I mean, I remember, and I don't want people don't look at me weird for this because I used to watch this show a lot, and I don't watch it anymore. But I remember I saw a Ghost Adventure show one time, and they had Vince Neil with them, and they were in like the Sands Hotel or something, or the Dunes or something. They were just getting ready to destroy. And of course, he goes in there and he's got 2 girls with him. And I was looking at him, I'm like, wow, he gained weight, man. He doesn't look like the same Vince Neil he looked like, 30, 40 years ago for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing what age can do, especially there's people that I see that I used to, look up to, whether it was music or movies or whatnot. It's like, holy crap.
Well, and my wife hates me because like right now, actually, it's not that warm here in Tombstone. Tombstone's at 5,000 feet. So we actually get snow in the winter. We don't get a lot of snow, but we get a little dusting of snow now and then. And it's like right now, I mean, I'm in a jacket because I am the same size I was as a freshman in college. It's like I never gained any weight. I didn't get a beer belly. My wife hates it. My wife is always telling me when I'm freezing, she's like, would you like to borrow some Fatitude? And I'm like, no, I'm okay. But I'll be out here. It's like 50 something degrees and I'm ready for the jacket. I'm ready for a scarf. I'm ready for the beanie. And my wife's like, oh, look, it's t-shirt weather. And I'm like, no, it's not t-shirt weather.
No, I'm with you. This morning when I left, it was 68 degrees. And I was like, whoo, I should have grabbed a sweater.
You know what? I get it. Because when I lived in Southern California, where I lived, it never snowed. It almost never rained. It didn't do any of that stuff. Now, this is a weird thing because I don't know if you have an opinion about this, but we get these torrential. Actually, this year we didn't get so much monsoon. It was kind of more like non-soon this year instead of monsoon. But people have told me that when they're investigating outside locations like Boot Hill or something like that, or there's some other like ghost towns and stuff that are not far from Tombstone that you can investigate as well. And they're talking about when it's monsoons that the water in the air just amps up the activity. And I got to be honest, I'm one of those guys that I'm like, you're standing around in monsoon rain trying to get evidence. And I'm like, monsoon rain is like guys on your roof with hoses. I mean, it's like pouring rain. I'm like, I don't even know how you could hear EVPs or anything, but I see a lot of ghost shows where they talk about, there's water that runs under this place, or this place was built over a river, or this place is up against the coast. What's your opinion on that?
I think it could magnify it, just because if you think about how water conducts electricity. But, I don't really go out and investigate. Like here, people say that activity picks up during hurricanes. And it's like, okay, if you're outside investigating during a hurricane, go for it.
Oh, my God. It's like, who was it that used Al Roker? Remember Al Roker?
Yep.
The black weather guy? Yeah. He'd always go out there, and he used to weigh a ton, right? And he'd be out there, and he'd be on the microphone going, ah, 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 and the wind would be blowing, and he'd be like holding on to a light pole or something. Last time I saw him do something like that, he went out there and he lost like 150 pounds or something, and he was literally getting blown down the street. I mean, he couldn't hold himself up, and I'm like, who would investigate in that? I mean, like, the weather, you hear that crazy wind. It's like, how could you get an EVP with that kind of sound going on, and weather and things pounding and flying all over the place? I just don't get it. I've heard people say, oh, it's a great time, go out during monsoon. And I'm like, I don't want to be outside during monsoon. It's raining really hard.
Right. Or my favorite is, not to say that they didn't capture something howling, but they're like, listen to the howling. And it's like, you have 100-mile-an-hour winds outside your house.
Did you? I don't know if I hadn't heard about this at all. Did you hear about the hurricane in Acapulco?
Yes.
Oh, my God. They were talking 165-mile-an-hour sustained winds. And I'm like, oh, my, can you imagine? That's what I mean. There's someone out in a hurricane, and they're trying to get EVPs. No, you're going to record a lot of wind and breaking branches and breaking windows. And you should be not outside anyway. It's just crazy.
We were actually watching that one because we were afraid it was going to come north instead of continuing on its direction. And if it came north, then it would have hit us.
Yeah, well, that's for another kind of show. But I'll tell you what, that thing, I was watching all these guys talking about the weather, right? Because I'm interested in all kinds of weird activity. I'm all into the UFO thing. I'm into ancient aliens. I'm into, I'm not so much into Bigfoot, but there's other things, chupacabras, stuff like that. It's like, there's a lot of stuff that interests me. And the Maui fire thing was just so unusually weird, the way that thing burnt. And people were talking about energy weapons and everything. And all the weather guys talking about this thing that went ashore in Acapulco, they're like, it went from a tropical storm to a level 5 hurricane in a matter of hours. And every one of these weather guys are like, I have never in my life. And one guy was like, had been doing weather for 40 years. He goes, I've never seen anything like that in the progression of a hurricane ever in my life. Like when they look at hurricanes around Florida, normally it's a hurricane before it gets to the shore. And this thing was like right next to the shore and went from a tropical depression to a level 5 hurricane. The guy's like, I've never seen it change that fast. And I'm like, direct energy weapon trial. I mean,
and it was overnight.
Yeah, like crazy fast, crazy fast.
Yep.
So we are gonna have another Paracon out here starting April 26th to the 28th, and there might even be people that come out early. Like, it's an interesting area because it's a really small town, but there's a surprising amount of stuff to do here. But the Paracon, we had a great one last year. We had Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective, was here, and we had Leon Wilkes, who was a religious demonologist, was here. That guy's great. He moved back east. He's in the military, but if anybody out there is ever working with a Paracon or someone, he'd be a great guy to get. People were very interested in him. We had an all Navajo Native American team of ghost hunters called Unearthing the Supernatural. They're super cool. They did a blessing on the whole town. They did a blessing on the middle of Allen Street, on the town, on the businesses, on the attendees, and on the spirits. It was like the coolest thing. And this year, I can't really drop names because I can tell you people, I'll do it this way. There's people that we're interested in having come. They don't have contracts yet, but I'm getting ready to send them. One of them is Shane Pittman. Shane Pittman is going to come. Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective, he's going to come again. These are guys we got from talking with the guy at the Michigan Paracon, which is probably the most successful Paracon that's running right now. He also gave us this gal, Jessa Potter, who's going to come out from Virginia. And she's really cool. We've got Karen Dahlman's going to be here, who's very cool. We've got, actually, we've got a guy, Rick, who has been in I don't know that he exactly fits with Paracon, but he's going to be cool to meet. He's been in like a zillion horror movies, horror movies. He's done all the stunt work for Jason Voorhees and stuff. Rick, oh my God, I can't remember his last name. I don't know. But there's going to be a bunch of people. There's going to be, people are going to speak, and there's going to be, workshops. But like I was telling you earlier, there is so many haunted locations. If you go to a real big Paracon, like one that's in Kansas City or Michigan, it's a big Paracon, right? It's just like a Comic-Con. There's speakers and there's vendors and there's workshops, but there's not much investigating. And last year at our Paracon, we had 14 locations to investigate. And so when you buy a ticket as like a VIP, you get a swag bag and all that. You get all the speakers, you get like a workshop, and then you get like a really long investigation. But there's other singular packages you can get that allow you to go to like 14 different locations. I mean, there's so many locations. You have to pick and choose what you're going to investigate because there's not enough time for how many locations there are. And it's just insane. Now, you're in Florida, and that's not that far of a drive.
No. I'm wishing I was still in Nevada.
It doesn't seem like that far of a drive until you get to where? Texas. Yeah. Because really, once you get on the other side of Texas to Florida that from the border doesn't seem that far to Florida. But like, and from here to Texas, I can get to El Paso, Texas in about 4.5 hours. But then it takes like a day and a half to drive across Texas. I don't know what the hell that's about, but
I know when we moved back to Florida, it was like a 3-day move, and one of the days was in Texas.
Right?
So where can people find more information about the Paracon so that way they can stay updated and they can get their tickets?
So actually, there's several ways. So obviously, we have a thing that's called tombstoneparacon.com. Because Tombstone Annual Wild West Paracon was too long a web title. So it's tombstoneparacon.com. If you're on Facebook, you can follow Tombstone Paracon. Tombstone, well, it's also there as Tombstone Paracon, but you can find it by Tombstone Wild West Paracon. You can see it there. We talk about it on the Discover Tombstone Facebook site. When there's stuff to talk about, because that's not a paranormal site, so we don't talk about it all the time. And there's also a Tombstone, a Discover Tombstone Instagram and X, and there's actually a Discover Boot Hill on Facebook too. And we do we do talk about Haunted Boot Hill on there quite a bit, which if you're into that kind of story is pretty interesting. And we will mention Paracon on there. And then there's also other things like the Global Ghost Hunt. I don't know if you've ever seen any stuff from that, but the Global Ghost Hunt, which puts live investigations out to a lot of platforms. It's not just like YouTube. It's some things in Europe and all over the place. And we just had this last Global Ghost Hunt was coming up on the end of October. And it's like a week long, and they get teams from all over the place. If you ever want to be involved in it, you just go to globalghosthunt.com, and I think your team can sign up for like $100 and get like worldwide recognition, get streamed all over. And we had 3 of those, and we weren't even having a Paracon, and we had 3 locations that were on there. You can actually go watch the investigations from it. If you find Global Ghost Hunt on like YouTube or something, you can go watch the one from Boot Hill, watch the one from Silver Spur Homestead, watch the one from a place called the Pete Spence House. And so they actually talk about us as well, because next year, the CEO of that company is going to come down, be one of our speakers, and he's going to be the first guy ever to stream from Shufflin Hall, which I also said, I believe is bar none the most haunted place in town. And, you know, it's weird because the town is full of hauntings. I mean, there's a lot of businesses and stuff that have hauntings. But the houses, I mean, there's houses around town where people are always talking about weird stuff happening at their house. And it's like a large percentage of, you know, they always say that that like about 50% of the people believe in the possibility of paranormal activity. And I'd say in Tombstone, that number is probably more like 75%, because I don't see very many people walking down the street that go, oh no, I don't believe anything about the paranormal, because there's so much weird crap that happens there like on a daily basis. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I definitely need to get out there. But I do want to thank you for taking your time to be on the show. I actually will reach out and have you on just before your Paracon to give it one last boost.
That would be awesome. And by then it'll be springtime, and I won't feel like I need to be wearing a jacket. You know, because I keep my jacket on because of my, I don't want to show my rippling muscles, because I don't like to be objectified, you know.
Right. But again, thank you for taking the time to be on the show. Super glad to learn about it. And I will definitely see about getting out there. I'm looking forward to getting out there.
Okay. And again, tombstoneparacon.com, and then Tombstone Paracon on Facebook, Discover Tombstone on Facebook, and Discover Boot Hill on Facebook as well.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I get all those links on my page and on the YouTube channel as well, so people can find you immediately. So again, thank you. And thank you everyone for watching.
You bet.
Sorry for the time change today, but we will at 11 a.m. Eastern. You guys all have a great week.
Happy holidays.